again from the perspective of modern science, that what we take to be our choices, and modernism and liberalism is all about the sanctity of human choice and freedom to choose, that in fact we have no such thing, properly speaking. Now, I don't want to make a huge detour now into the whole question of free will and predestination, but just to remind ourselves, looking at it not from the Kalam perspective, but the scientific perspective, that our sort of folk consciousness assumes that the past is something that is real and happened, it could have been otherwise, and we're now in this kind of infinitesimally thin knife edge moment, and travelling, this kind of absurd geographical metaphor, as if we're travelling into something else, imaginatively figured as another land called the future. Our human subjectivity determines that. We can't imagine things otherwise. And Revelation addresses us on the basis of our perception of dahar, of time, on that basis. But the reality is really different, as the string theorists will tell you, that our childish perception of linear time has nothing to do with what's really out there in the cosmos. And that time, as even Einstein saw, is something that twists and turns and is relative. The faster you go, the time becomes stretched. Once you approach a singularity such as a black hole, you can theoretically even move back in time, move forward in time. The physicists are perfectly happy with this. And again, it blows our mind, but it is quite close to this Sufistic and ultimately Quranic understanding that time is really just a human point of view. It's a subjective experience. It's not real. So the string theorists are now saying that there are particles that move faster than the speed of light. These are the so-called tachyons. Most physicists accept their existence now. And according to the general theory of relativity, if you move faster than the speed of light, you move back in time. So the current physical model of the cosmologist is that our present reality, which we all like to think of as the consequence in some simple way of the past, is in fact the consequence of the past, but also the consequence of the future. And this is what's called reverse causality. And again, we find that hard to imagine. But this is the current cosmological model, reverse causality. If you have access to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy and you look under reverse causality, you'll find all kinds of interesting philosophical, cosmological jugglings with that. So that's a brief detour into this reality, because quite often we look at this kind of literature, this ancient mystical stuff about Ibn al-Waqt and what time is, and the divine action and human free will, and we say, oh, that's medieval, but now we know better. And we tend to think in terms of Newtonian physics, but things have really moved on from the time of Newton. And in fact, the Kalam Ash'ari model and the Sufi model of a very dynamic creation in flux, where much has to do with the perception of the human observer. If you know about Schrödinger's cat, you'll be aware of how absolute that can be. Makes this dynamic model of creation that the Sufis are proposing of immediate cosmological agency from the beyond much, much more accessible. All of this Sufi stuff in the 19th century would have seemed really pre-modern, even Aristotelian, or certainly Platonic. But nowadays, it's a much more viable view. So this idea of being in the moment, I think our Islam can be strengthened by an awareness of what the string theorists are saying. And we can also be calmed by this. What does Allah say about the people who understand reality? لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. They don't fear, nor do they grieve. And that's exactly this Ibn al-Waqt. These are the awliya. They do not grieve because the past is in Allah's knowledge. We have no access to it. It can't be changed. Don't be grieved. It's Allah's decree. Don't resent what He has decreed. And do not fear. That's about the future. The future also is known. It's there in the divine knowledge. So the Ibn al-Waqt, the one who is of the moment, is concerned only with what his response is to his immediate situation. Now, his immediate situation may require, in terms of the adab of humanity and the sharia, that he engages in planning for the future, because that's also part of the sunnah. This is part of tawakkul. But at the deeper level of his humanity, he will be aware that what will happen will happen. And this is an axiom of traditional Muslim wisdom. And when we start to lose that, then we really become very anxious, because we look at the state of the world and the state of ourselves and the state of everything, and obviously it's cracking up. And if that goes deep into us rather than making us weep on the surface, then our acceptance of Tawheed has been damaged, because we're thinking that Allah's creation is getting out of control and he's working really hard, but somehow he's not making it, and things are happening that he really doesn't want to happen. That's not Tawheed. A certain type of what Christians call process theology will adhere to that. They try to solve the problem of evil and the problem of the runaway secular world by saying that, well, God is just one agent amongst many in creation, and we have to try and help him. That's what religion is about. It's about the church helping God to sort out the mess of the world. Well, that's a pagan conception. It has nothing to do with Abrahamic monotheism, which is exactly about taslim and about being ibn al-waqt. So again, this line says, so stay alert in ear and consciousness for those times, and seize such breaths when they arise. In the Naqshbandi tradition, finally, we have the principle of khush dardam, attentiveness in the moment. Is one of the four usul of the Naqshbandi way. It's absolutely essential. Don't space out, don't daydream, don't wool gather. Instead, be what you can in the moment. Because what are you? You are your consciousness, I suppose. And your consciousness is, for the majority of your times, in a kind of autopilot. Precisely because of daydreaming about the past and what might have been, fantasizing about the future and what you'd like to be, you miss the reality of the moment, and hence you're half dead. And hence to come to life is to be attentive in the moment. And this is a very important dimension of our spirituality.